3 verses in Proverbs have done more damage to Christian families than almost anything else in Scripture, not because the verses are wrong, but because of how they've been used. One side reads those verses and turns the rod into a threat, calling anger obedience. The other side reads the same Bible and decides discipline itself is outdated, harsh, something the modern church has outgrown. Both sides believe they're protecting children. Both sides are reacting to real concerns, but both can end up reading Scripture like a weapon instead of wisdom. So let's slow down and look at what's being said, because many parents, on both sides, have missed the heart of it. Proverbs 13:24 says, "Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them." That's the verse people build entire parenting philosophies on, in both directions. Here's what gets lost. Proverbs was not written as law. It was not handed down on a mountain with commandments attached. Proverbs is wisdom literature, written as a father's instruction to his son on how to live well. It sits closer to poetry and formation than to a courtroom statute. That changes how we read it. Wisdom literature gives general truths, not mechanical formulas. It gives patterns for life, not permission slips for impulses we already wanted to justify. And the rod is not a specific tool with a modern instruction manual. In the ancient world, a rod was what a shepherd carried. It was an instrument of guidance. A shepherd used it to correct direction, fend off predators, and keep sheep from wandering into danger. Psalm 23 gives the same image. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Comfort. Not terror, not rage, not pain, comfort. A shepherd's rod corrects a sheep. It does not crush a sheep into submission. If a shepherd used his rod to injure the sheep he was called to protect, we would not call that shepherding. We would call that abuse. The image Proverbs uses was never meant to describe violence. It describes active, loving guidance, the kind that steps in before a child wanders somewhere dangerous. So when Proverbs 13:24 says the one who loves their child is careful to discipline them, careful matters as much as discipline. Careful implies attention, restraint, a parent present enough to notice when a child needs correction, and controlled enough not to let anger drive the response. That's where the first error appears. Some parents use this verse to justify discipline that comes from frustration, not love. They're not shepherding, they're reacting. Scripture speaks to this too. Ephesians 6:4 says, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." Colossians 3:21 says almost the same thing. Don't embitter your children, or they'll become discouraged. That means the emotional temperature of the parent matters. The goal is not simply to stop behavior as quickly as possible. The goal is to train a heart, shape wisdom, and protect trust. If your discipline is driven by your anger, embarrassment, exhaustion, or fear of what other people think, that is not what Proverbs 13:24 is describing. That's the opposite of careful. That's a parent using a biblical word to defend an unbiblical impulse. Scripture never gives permission for correction that comes from rage. Proverbs 15:1 says it plainly. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. If your words or actions in discipline stir up more anger, in your child or in yourself, you have left the wisdom of Proverbs, even while quoting it. Now here's the second error, and it's just as serious, even though it gets less pushback in many Christian circles today. Some parents see the harm caused by angry discipline and swing to the other side. They decide correction itself is the problem. They stop setting boundaries. They stop saying no. They stop following through. They call it grace. They call it gentleness. But if you strip all correction out of raising a child, you haven't found grace. You've abandoned the wisdom you're trying to avoid misusing. Proverbs 29:15 says, "A child left undisciplined disgraces its mother." That's a hard verse, but it's consistent with the whole book. Proverbs isn't only concerned with parents who correct too harshly. It's also concerned with parents who don't correct at all. Hebrews 12 tells us God disciplines those he loves, the way a father disciplines a child he delights in. Discipline, biblically, is not the opposite of love. It's evidence of it. A parent who never corrects, redirects, or says, "Not that way," isn't being more loving. They're being less present. Children do not experience the absence of boundaries as freedom for long. Eventually, they experience it as confusion. They need warmth, affection, and patience. But they also need a parent who will lovingly tell the truth, interrupt destructive patterns, and guide them back toward what is good. So here's where that leaves us. Not in the middle because the middle sounds nice. In the middle because that's what the text says when you read the whole counsel of Scripture instead of 3 isolated verses. Correction from anger is not what Proverbs describes. Absence of correction is not what Proverbs describes either. Proverbs describes a shepherd's rod, present, attentive, guiding, protective, discipline that corrects a child's direction without wounding a child's spirit. What does that look like on a Tuesday afternoon when your 4-year-old has hurt their sibling for the 3rd time and you are out of patience? It looks like pausing before you respond. Not because pausing makes you a pushover, but because Proverbs 15:1 says the gentle answer is the one that actually works. It looks like lowering your voice before giving instruction, moving close instead of shouting from across the room, separating children for safety without shaming either one, saying, "I will not let you hurt your brother," with calm firmness, not explosive anger. It looks like correction with purpose, not correction to relieve your frustration. It looks like explaining, at an age-appropriate level, why the behavior matters. Not a lecture that overwhelms them, but enough truth to connect the consequence to the heart. It looks like your child knowing, even while being corrected, that they're safe. That the rod in your hand, whatever form discipline takes in your home, is being used the way a shepherd uses it, to guide, not to wound, and it looks like still having boundaries. Still saying no. Still following through. Grace was never meant to replace structure. In Scripture, God's grace exists alongside real accountability, consequences, and correction. A parent who confuses gentleness with permissiveness is just as far from the biblical picture as a parent who confuses discipline with anger. One wounds through harshness, the other wounds through absence. Neither looks like the shepherd. If this is helping you see these verses differently, take a second and subscribe to this channel. This is the kind of conversation we have here. Taking the verses that get misused most and sitting with what they actually mean. You'll want to be here for the next one. If you've been on the anger side, if your discipline has been driven more by frustration than by your child's actual need, this is not condemnation. It's an invitation to put the rod down for a moment, take a breath, and return to Proverbs, reading it as wisdom instead of ammunition. And if you've been on the other side, if you've let correction slide because it felt harsh, unloving, or old-fashioned, this is an invitation too, not to become harsher, but to become more present, more willing to guide, even when guiding is uncomfortable, more willing to love your child enough to interrupt what will harm them. Because that's what the shepherd does, not out of anger, not out of absence, out of love that's willing to correct. So don't stop at 3 verses. Read all 31 chapters of Proverbs. Read them as a father's wisdom to his child, not as a legal code to enforce. You'll find far more about gentleness, patience, self-control, humility, listening, and guarding your tongue than about the rod. And when you find that verse again, you'll read it the way it was meant to be read, not as a license for harshness, not as an excuse for passivity, but as a picture of love strong enough to guide and gentle enough to protect. Wisdom lives in that place. So here's my question for you. Where has this shown up in your home, the anger side or the absence side? Leave a comment and tell me which one you've had to wrestle with. And if this helped you, share it with another parent trying to follow Jesus in real family life.